Good afternoon and welcome back to our third and final day of gridX days for 2022. We've had an amazing last 2 days focusing on the status quo, sustainability issues, and the different trends facing the energy industry. Today, we're focusing on technological solutions, innovation, skills gap, whole bunch of really interesting stuff. So we're really excited to dive into the topics. And I obviously have a special guest here with me today. So thanks for joining us today, David.
Thank you. Great being here.
Good. Okay, I'll introduce the topic and then we'll introduce David as well. So PwC State of Climate Tech study showed that investment in climate tech grew by 210% from the first half of 2020 to 2021. And of 3,000 climate techs identified across the world, 78 unicorns emerged. Is this how we should measure success? And with so many startups, new ideas and technologies emerging, how can we identify what is really important, what has true potential, and what will really aid us in enabling the energy transition? To find that out, we have David Balensiefen with us here, who is co-founder and managing director of gridX. David launched a technology that connects all types of decentralized energy resources and makes it possible to optimize energy flows in any context. He's on a mission to revolutionize the energy sector and enable a world based on clean energy. Thanks for being here, David.
Thanks for inviting me.
And with him, we have Tim Schumacher, who has been an entrepreneur since he was a kid, when he got his first computer and started coding. He's founded and led several companies, including Sedo.com, IO.com, and most recently, SARS Group. He's passionate about investing in startups and mentoring the next generation of climate tech founders. Together with Ecosia, he's building up World Fund, where he is managing general partner. Tim, welcome to the panel.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. We also have Annemarie de Jong, who's an award-winning growth-minded leader, motivational speaker, and tech advisor. She was the Chief Commercial Officer at Solar Monkey in the Netherlands, and recently joined JumpTech as country manager for Germany, responsible for opening up and growing the DACH market to accelerate the worldwide adoption of EVs and clean technologies. JumpTech provides a software platform that simplifies the EV charge point installation process. Annemarie, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Wonderful, thank you.
All right, we were also supposed to be joined by Christoph Ostermann, but unfortunately due to family reasons, he couldn't join us today. So the three of us will be diving into the discussion. Tim, to start off with, what do you look for when trying to find the next big thing?
Yeah, so we look for companies that really move the needle on decarbonization. We look for companies that can save at least 100 megatons. And that's hard to measure because sometimes it's super indirect. I mean, take gridX, for example, it's like you can't say, okay, it's exactly like that, but basically through the work you do in the decentralized world, you obviously have a profound impact. And that's exactly the type of things we look for is like what really moves the needle, what are things that can change decarbonization in the energy world, but also in our case, we also invest in other things, building, transportation. I mean, it's all very closely connected, but also things like food, agriculture, and land use, where you have huge impacts. And we believe, and that's basically the general hypothesis of World Fund. We believe that those will be the winners of the next decade as the world decarbonizes and has to decarbonize, and well, hopefully does so.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And David, what are the major growing pains experienced by fast-growing companies, and how can these be overcome?
Yeah, a rather good question. Since gridX is my first job, I only have a sample number of one. But of course, I'm in a lot of exchange with other founders. But to be honest, I think with every fast-growing company, there comes a lot of challenges and pains. Yeah, maybe starting with one, I think it's really culture, because if you're growing quite fast, it's all about maintaining the culture and also developing the culture in a positive way. So I think that's a big challenge also for the recruiting and employer branding team to kind of find the right talent. And also, I think it's more important to hire for character and then train for skills. So I think that's really a big pain in current organization. Then probably like lack of transparency, because I think as a small company, everybody knows kind of what the other teams are doing, and then suddenly you have departments and larger teams and organization. So you can kind of feel inefficiencies in meeting culture, and of course, then you need processes and so on. I think that's sometimes quite painful. And at the end, I would also say internal communication is sometimes pretty hard to align everyone on a constant base. What is our kind of ultimate vision, how to get there, and to really align every team member, the whole team, to achieve our mission, our vision. So I think I would assume these are kind of the main challenges every company are facing in this kind of stage. But I think there are countless other challenges, and I think Tim, with his experience, also Annemarie, they can sing some songs about that. And also, I think Tim helped us quite a bit in the past to overcome the challenges.
Mm-hmm. Annemarie, would you add anything to that, as you have a bit of experience with scaling companies as well?
Well, first of all, it's a ride, and I think everyone who joins a scale up or a startup, buckle up and enjoy the ride. You're going to do things you've never experienced, never thought you'd have to do, and you need to be willing to get your hands dirty. Because I think what's really, really important, is we're doing it all together. And if it means that you have to move desks, you move desks. If it means that you have to answer customer queries, you answer customer queries. Now, I think an important element, and which is also often a growing pain, is the burn rate. Something not spoken about so much, but keep the burn rate in mind, and also explain why that's important. Because the reality is, startups is not only unicorns. There are also failures, and if you look at the failures and why people have failed, it's also maybe, of course, it was a product market fit issue, but it's also sometimes that I see, spending money is easy, but that doesn't mean that your company will be sustainable. And I think that mindset and that awareness is really important.
Mm-hmm. Tim, what would your response to that be? That spending money is easy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Annemarie, you're right. I mean, that mindset that spending money is easy and you shouldn't maybe just spend it because VC money is always there, that fortunately comes back. My first company was started in 2001. I started that right after finishing university, and that was like the worst time to raise funding. The dot-com boost, the dot-com market had just collapsed, and but then it went up until kind of 2008. So there was financial crisis, but then for the last 12 years, it only went up. So until kind of the first Corona dip 2020, which was a really like short dip, people have never experienced that things will also go, that maybe you cannot raise funds anymore. And so it's kind of the first time when people actually realize, okay, running a company in the long run means that you have to make as much money as you spend, or ideally even make a little more than you spend.
Yeah, building up on that, I also think, scaling companies and growing internationally, that's the wish of everyone. You want to go everywhere, you convince everyone. There's so much potential, you have this brilliant idea, but focus, and focus. Yes. And I think, if we and David, you also touched upon that, one of the growing pains of startups is that there's so much opportunity, you're so enthusiastic, but be careful that you don't burn yourself, and really bring the right focus. And if that means opening up another market 1 year later, but being very successful at it, because the other market, you had some more time, you took the learnings. I think that's sometimes more important. And that's also what I see when I talk to startups, sometimes that you can't be too hungry, right? We have to change the world. We want to make an impact, but sometimes, taking one extra pace helps.
And let's talk a little bit more specifically about the challenges in the climate tech space. Does it make it easier that people feel like they can have an impact through their jobs, or are there specific challenges in this area that, might not apply to other industries? Tim, what do you think?
So there are different challenges. I mean, some things are exactly the same. So, I mean, the things you've said about the the difficulties of scaling a companies, I would say they're exactly the same, whether you have a climate startup or a non-climate startup. Culture issues, the scaling issues, having to delegate, funding, all of that. But then there are other things which are very peculiar. So one thing, for example, on the positive side is that it's really much easier to find great talent. Like a lot of people really want to work in this space. They don't want to create silly games and take money out of teenagers' pockets, but they really want to move the world to the better. And so I'm seeing both from experienced entrepreneurs, but also from young aspiring founders, I see a huge shift from people doing useless stuff over to climate, which is really, really good. But then there's also a danger because sometimes people forget that those things have to make economic sense. And when you're like in our climate bubble, you tend to forget that there is a whole world out there which says, okay, how much does it cost? How much does it bring? And if you don't have the right business model, then you can be enthusiastic and climate positive all day long, but it won't move the needle. And you're not getting out of your bubble, and you will never really find customers apart from those like super enthusiastic adopters. And that's a real kind of, that struggle is a real danger, and you have to watch out for that and make sure that you actually build something which you can sell to everyone. And that's going to be my last sentence. I sometimes jokingly say the best climate tech solutions are the ones you can sell to climate change deniers. And that should be the basis for kind of any business model.
Yeah. I love that, what you say there. I mean, what came to my mind was, it's not a charity, even if you work in climate tech, it has to make market sense. There needs to be an audience, and you need to solve a problem. And I think I'll keep that one. You need to be able to convince climate deniers because, we need everyone on board.
And just jumping on that a little bit more, Tim, at the beginning, you said you look for companies that reduce a certain number of emissions, but then it obviously also has to make economic sense at the same time. So how do you kind of balance those two needs?
Well, the good thing is that it is very often balanced. It's like to us, decarbonization is a predictor for financial return. If you save a lot of carbon, you usually also save a lot of energy, and that means you save money. Or for example, we've got another example from the non-energy world. We've got one startup in the World Fund is they reduce food waste by smarter ordering for supermarkets. And people might think it's a small problem. It's actually a huge one. Like there's so much fruit and vegetables are wasted every day. And that means if you reduce food waste, your profitability shoots up as a supermarket. And so then it's a very profitable thing. And so very often those things are very much aligned. It's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. And so after a company scales, David, what sort of pathways do startups have of being bought out by giants, IPOing, and how do you know what the right path is?
I think there are so many options, and it really depends again on the business and what they need. So I think for some companies, it makes totally sense to get bought by any major other company. But of course, I think IPOs just like one other source of getting additional funding is in case the private market is not providing enough funding to these kind of companies. So it really depends on where you go and what you do. I think especially for the energy market, it sometimes makes sense to go with bigger ones because due to heavy regulation in certain respective markets, so that's not easy to kind of change things. I think we at gridX, we know it quite well, that if it comes to any grid operation topics, it gets very, I would say, bureaucratic. So therefore, to really have impact and also the option and the possibility to change, it can make sense. But I think it's always the question of your own business and what at the end you want to do. And it's not always driven by just the founders. In case you take VC money, of course, it's also driven by investors. And of course, they're looking for kind of a return at one hand, like after 10 years or 12 years, whatever. I think quite early on, you kind of decide with your cap table what kind of route you're going, whether it's kind of a bootstrapped company or a funded company. But I think there are plenty of options.
And Tim, what would your perspective there be on the other side of that?
I would agree. There are plenty of options, and I think it's always important that any path, the path starts with the beginning, what type of funding you look, what company structure you have, that fits both the industry and your business model, and also the founder profile. And let me make this more concrete. So there are industries where you have to grow super fast. There's strong network effects. There's no way around venture capital. You have to take money, you have to go the venture route, but then once you're in the venture capital hamster wheel, and hamster wheel maybe sounds a little negative, but it gives you a lot of pressure, but you have the chance to become one of the biggest in the world, but it's also not for everyone. It's high risk, high return. You're building something huge. On the other side, there is a real world out there with bootstrap companies. Extreme example could be also purpose-based companies, non-profit companies like Ecosia, for example, which we turned into a non-profit at some point. Super solid, super strong companies, very value-driven. But those you cannot build if you require a lot of funding along the way. And also as a founder, you need to know, like, is the stress of VC for you? Are your ambitions big enough for that? If they are, then that's the best route to go. If they are not, you might be better in a more iterative world, also in an industry where you don't need to, there's no winner takes all. And so there are a lot of questions, and I think people should also not be blinded by just funding rounds that, like, company X has raised 100 million. Is like, yeah, fine, but it also often means that, well, you have to pay that money back at the end of the day. And so it's not one size fits all, but it's really, there are a lot of good approaches. There are great venture capital based companies, but there are also great bootstrap companies, and they all deserve recognition in their own way, and for the success of the founders.
Maybe to add on that, I think there's sometimes also kind of the dilemma if you raise a bunch of money, especially in a world where you want to change and have purpose with your company, you kind of get sometimes forced to do the wrong stuff. Yeah, Annemarie told about expansion, yeah, so that the investors expect certain amount of return or growth numbers and rates. And I think especially in the climate tech industry, or if you want to build a company in this kind of space, it's all about having how you say it, it's more like a marathon, or even more, because you can't change the world from today to tomorrow. It's really about a long time, and I think taking the wrong routes and getting pressured to do that, I think it can be sometimes the death of a startup and a company. So I think that's really like finding the right balancing act between investors that also have like the long-term vision, and also to create a sustainable impact, also in terms of return, but also in terms of impact on the society and the earth. Yeah.
That segues very nicely into my next question, Annemarie. We've talked a bit about how we can measure success, particularly for scale-ups. How difficult is it to kind of maintain that focus on a company's North Star, particularly as it grows and other challenges arise? Do you have any sort of experience or tips?
I think what's really important is that you remember what you're doing it for and what's the like big, hairy, audacious goal. And of course, you have all the day-to-day things that run, but I think it's very important, and that's a tip I'd give, is to, have a regular meeting where you look at your top goal once every 6 weeks, every quarter, what you want, and see, are we still steering towards that? I sometimes laughingly make the joke, if you're in the middle of the ocean, and the whole crew thinks you're going to Canada, but if you change the degrees all the time, you end up in Cuba. And and it's because you're not reaching or going for that North Star. And that happens a lot because you're distracted, because there's opportunity. So I think, first of all, having that conversation on a frequent basis, and also, a little bit of deviation isn't bad as long as you're going back on your course. So I think that's tip one: have regular meetings and talk about, are we still doing that? And then, of course, the classical measures, How many customers are you acquiring? Customer acquisition costs, what's the revenue? Very important, retention, are you on the right track? I think if you're in a boat in the middle of the ocean, to keep it with the analogy, and at the end, everyone falls out, you have a problem. So also there, keep looking, am I on the right track? Am I in the right type of boat? What's your burn rate? And I think one that's really most important, how are the people in my company doing? Because at the end of the day, I think the most important value inside your company is the people that work for you. And if you see that a half of your crew are getting a burnout, or they're really very tired, and a lot of people are leaving and they're not motivated, then you're doing something wrong. And if we talk about measuring success, I don't think people is a factor that's often looked at in the classical, slides and things you have to fill in, but it is one of the most important ones.
Yeah, thanks, Annemarie. And Tim, obviously this is kind of $1 million question, and we wish we all knew this, but good ideas are one thing, identifying true potential is another. You talked a little bit about it at the beginning, but how can you really identify if something will grow and be successful in the future?
I mean, that's super hard. I mean, and I mean, I've been doing climate investments for a long time now, even before my fund. Of course, I've had quite a few failures as well, where I thought, hey, this is going to be great. I mean, it's always a mix of things. It starts with the people. I think, as everybody would say, the people are more important than anything, because a great team, even if they start off on the wrong foot, they will pivot to a business model which will work, while a strong team might be in the right market, but they'll be overrun by a better team. So it starts off with the people. I always look for, is it a complementary team? So is it strong both on the technical front, but also on the business and sales front? Because you don't want people who just kind of fiddle in their laboratory and never sell anything. You also don't want to have sellers who just go around and tell how great they are, but they don't have anything. So you really want to have the combination of both. I mean, business model is important. I think really, as I said earlier, having a business model which is so strong that you can, even if you have a climate impact, sell it to climate change deniers, because it is about the economic benefit, but it's also about the ease of the solution. There might be an economic benefit if the hurdles are so big. David, you alluded a little bit to that you said the energy world is very slow to transition. And I think that is a challenge, because sometimes you think like, oh, this is a no-brainer to do this, but then, well, the big energy companies, for them, it's like a footnote and they could care less. And so you always have to think, even if the business model is right, how easy it is to convince the right people, who are the decision makers, why is the industry as slow as they are, and really thinking about your go-to-market strategy in a way. And then, I mean, I always look about passion. The marathon approach, which has been mentioned here, is okay. If you really need to have the passion to run this company for 5-10 years, because like there is really no such thing as an overnight success. It always comes with a lot of work and a lot of pain. And so I really always want to understand, is the founder really intrinsically motivated to do what he or she does, or is it more like, okay, I'm going to try this, and if it doesn't work out, then next year I'll do something else. And so it's really a mix of things, which I think are success-based, and that's the ingredient. And then, of course, you build a company culture. I agree, Annemarie, is super important. It's like you are a role model as a founder, and if you're able to build this, then I think you have all the recipes for success.
Nice, thanks, Tim. Would David or Annemarie, would you want to add anything to that?
No, I think the only question I would have to Tim is, how do you know what is like at the beginning the right business model? So I think if you look at gridX, for instance, we started completely on the other hand, on the other side, and then kind of pivoted early on. I think we are at kind of day one of many decades of climate innovation. And I think it's very hard to predict what is nowadays the right business model. So I would challenge that. I think it's more identifying the market potential in the future, and also I think having the right team that also can be stressed because it won't go always up. It will go down probably like quite a bit. So I think it's more about the team and then the business model. Hopefully, if they do like the right product market fit approach, they will identify the right business model in the next years, and it can potentially also change. So I think, that I don't know how you do that, Tim, but seeing what is the right business model from the beginning on, but I think that could be interesting.
Yeah, I think it's both. I think you need, you're right that the business model can absolutely change. I think it's the market potential is one thing, but then I think the initial business model is always your initial go-to market. You're saying, okay, this is the huge opportunity. But then also as a founder, it's wrong to say, okay, we're going to address this huge opportunity head on and we're going to do everything. But out of this big opportunity, you do one thing, and you're essentially say, okay, I'm going to start this way and start with this one thing. But if that works out, I can take my business model and go to A, B, C, and D. And then actually, in reality, you might notice that your initial business model isn't the right thing, but you might pick business model B. And I think that's what, as a venture capitalist, you try to understand in this initial discussion, if you're actually able as a founder to see both the abstract big potential, but also the very clear go-to-market in the very beginning. And you can, as a founder, you can do both things wrong. You can address the market way too big at the beginning and just fail, or you can stay in your niche and never see what the actual real market potential is. And so the real art is kind of doing both at the same time.
Oh.
You agree, David?
Yeah.
And when it comes to scaling, David, do you think there is such a thing as too fast? How can you kind of identify the tipping point?
Ooh, good question. I would probably say a proxy are customer complaints, and also probably product quality, and then also employee complaints at a certain point. I think that you can really feel and sense whether you grew too fast or not. I remember back when we did like our first angel round in 2016, we met a business angel. He always said, like, a rule of thumb is don't grow faster than 2x on your headcount, because at a certain point you bring more new people in the company that you have as an existing base and foundation, also culture-wise. And yeah, I would say, so we grew this year kind of 2x, and yeah, I think it's working quite well, but I would believe growing much faster than that, also in terms of headcount. Even I think the market is there. We could grow 3x or something like that, but I think that's not sustainable. And we are in the sustainable industry, but also we want to have a sustainable company, and also what Annemarie said, caring about the people. And I think that is probably like one indicator that you grew too fast. That also kind of then the quality of your product and processes are not that good anymore. Of course, at a certain point, it needs to be like that. That you need to make compromises. But I think that would be an indicator. Yeah.
Annemarie, would you add anything to that?
Growing too fast is at the moment used a lot in the media and in the tech, right? To let off people, because people say you hired too fast, you grew too fast. Look, I think there's an ambiguity to this one, because sometimes you have a market momentum and you need to acquire as fast as you can the market, grow, cover the land, because for example, if we look at EVs, in 3 to 5 years, the landscape is going to look absolutely totally different. So if you don't do it now, you don't have 2 to 3 years. So sometimes you really need to go fast, full throttle, push the metal. And that's hard, right? Because yes, that could mean you grow too fast, but either you go fast or you die trying. So I do want to also bring that point. That's sometimes the challenging part in the startup world and in the scale-up world. I do agree with David that sometimes you hear too many customer complaints, the product isn't good enough. But again, look at your North Star, and I've also in the past sometimes made very hard decisions that we had to grow fast, we had to roll out certain things. It did mean that I knew that in half a year down the line, I would get customer complaints, but it would get us to the next stage, which I needed. And I think one of the challenges in running a company is that you constantly have to balance that, what do I do? What don't I do? I do believe it, nowadays leading starts with why and explaining that, because we have to assume, and we know that all of our employees are super smart. You've got something when you want to change the world or you want to make an impact, right? And so sometimes also explaining, look, we're going to do something that for a lot of you will feel very unnatural and very painful, but we're still going to do it. And I know we'll get the complaints down the line, but it still makes sense. You got to trust me, is a conversation you also need to have instead of just pushing ahead as a leader. And then, yes, you can grow maybe too fast and learn and stumble along the way, but at least you tried.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Annemarie. We've had a question from the audience from Peter asking, where in the energy space do you see the biggest need for new players, ideas, and solutions? Tim, would you have an answer to that?
Well, David, you know the energy space even better than I do. First, I would say to me, and that was quite an inspiration also when we started World Fund, something like Project Drawdown is a great inspiration. It's like you just scroll down the projects in the energy space in Project Drawdown, and that way you got a scientifically quantified idea of what actually moves the needle. So I would suggest that to Peter. We have our own hypothesis as World Fund. Storage is a topic we're looking at. Anything, the thing gridX is in decentralized energy resources, in software and intelligence. There's a lot of movements there. Then also in the IoT segment, when it comes to connecting things to buildings, for example, is a big lever. There are countless things. It's just energy has been so big. It's almost, if you ask, is like, what are the right things in digitalization? You could also end up with like 100 interesting use cases. But yeah, as I said, Project Drawdown, I think, is a good starting point of just seeing what's out there.
David, what's your perspective on that?
I would agree with what Tim said. What I really see sometimes also that investors are thinking about more theoretical solutions in the future. But what I really see at the moment and also in the next years is we have a labor shortage. So fighting against climate change is also a hardware labor problem. So I think we need to find a solution how to get very well educated installers and so on very fast in the markets, that they really can install the solutions that are, for instance, already there. And I think finding kind of a new education program to bring more craftsmen into the market, I think it's very important, because I see very great companies scaling solar panels and also battery storages in the markets, but still, if you compare how many units they're doing at the moment, it's tiny. So the market needs much more, and I think we can't afford to wait another 10 years until the people are there. So I think it's really finding, I don't know, I don't have like a clear picture on that, but finding kind of an education program to really onboard fast people from outside areas to be this kind of expertise guys. So I really see that.
Yeah, we're actually talking about that later at 4:30. So yeah, but are there certain areas where incumbents are lacking the ability to innovate, and do we need startups to kind of bring that really fast, agile innovation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a good example was are like dynamic prices, energy prices. So I think it was sometimes smiled by the big ones, what the small startups are doing. But if you see suddenly like gas and electricity prices are kind of peaking, it's getting more and more mainstream that people are thinking about what's my electricity bill, who's behind it, how can I optimize also in terms of being carbon neutral. I think that's one point. And also, I think dynamic prices, kind of new utilities, but also I think most of the trends at the past came from small startups, and they kind of innovated and then forced the big ones to act. And I think that's probably like, how innovation is happening. Not often done by the big tanks, mostly by the speedboats, and then kind of taken over at a certain point when it's market ready by the big ones.
Yeah. Annemarie, would you have anything to add to that?
I often say that the future is exciting, but I do think if we look ahead, to this winter or to the coming the coming years, it's not like, only growth, and what I'm really looking forward to is also innovation for everyone, because we have a huge problem on the housing and how to renovate them and how to isolate them properly. And David, like you said, we need enough workforce, but there must be other creative solutions. And those are the kinds that I'm kind of missing still, which aren't all about the grid and about storage, but just for you and me living in our house to straight away start reducing 40% of our energy usage that are innovative. I hung up a second rail of curtains. I would not classify that as super innovative for isolating my house. But, there must be better solutions. How can we, we have tons of houses out there. How can we work with them? And how can we really bring this innovation to people and not, to the early adopters and innovators? But yeah, that's something that I'm still looking for. And I think is something we also need. But I'm excited about, because we know that in times of hardship or in challenge, innovation springs up. So it's just a matter of time now.
Tim, do you have a response to that?
Yeah, no, fully agree. There's there are things which sometimes I also think we need to rethink things. I mean, there are also some non-commercial aspects. I mean, for example, I actually like the current discussion that we should all turn down our heating to like 17, 18 degrees. At Ecosia, we've not heated for years, and like you just put on a big sweater during the winter and it works fine. Like people still love to work there. So sometimes it's really just very simple, and that's non-commercial, not about VC investment or anything, but it's about very simply just rethinking some of the things which we've taken for granted, but then even there, they just don't make sense. But yeah, also other things which are like low tech, like the curtain is a great example. But also again on the tech side, I saw a startup the other day which challenged the conventional thinking. Why should we actually heat every room? We should heat people, not rooms. And I found that very interesting. I mean, I don't think they were ready for production, but they had something where they actually kind of spot on put the heat on whoever was moving that room, and that thing moved with that person. And I found that a smart thing. It's like, why are we heating huge rooms if there's one tiny person or two maybe standing in there? Good question. And so a lot of those things, just challenging conventional thinking and conventional wisdom, because that's the only way I think will get us out of the climate crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very valid point of just challenging the status quo and just having a bit of a mindset shift with some of these things. We've had a question from the audience, which I'll direct to David. With so much need for integration and collaboration, how applicable would you say open data and open software solutions are to scaling or starting climate tech businesses?
I think it's great. So at the end, also what Annemarie said, it's all about making innovation accessible to everyone, also in terms of starting a business. And if there's any open source, any open data platform, yeah, just build it or go for it, use it, whatever. But at the end, it's all about building then a product, a solution for a customer. It's not just about open source isn't per se a solution. It's just like a platform that could accelerate your development or shorten time to market. So yeah, I think it's great starting with that. And I think so far, unfortunately, there are not many well-known standards, at least in the energy world, that can be used because it's very fragmented. So if there's any good solution or innovation or initiative out there, I'm happy also to learn more about that.
Yeah, nice. Tim, Annemarie, would you add anything on that?
Well, I think sharing knowledge is the only way forward, right? So if there's open data, let's all use it and let's use it together to innovate. I think that's the right approach. And I think we need to keep in mind, like, what's the goal? Why are we doing it? And of course, coming back also to the points we raised earlier, it needs to be a viable business and it's not a charity. But let's try and drag along as many people as possible and, keep the focus on your company. But if others can benefit from the learnings, please do so. And if that is the case with open data, wonderful.
Absolutely. Thanks. David, I also want to ask about something you said before about regulation in the energy world. It's a specific challenge, particularly within Europe. We've talked about that a lot over the last few days, that regulation is so different in different markets. And it's a big challenge, particularly for startups, scale-ups. Do you have any kind of insight onto how scale-ups can navigate those challenges? Is there kind of one best way, or what's your experience?
I think certain regulation, of course, you need to accept. You can't change it. But I think there are also so many ways starting a business where you don't need to hope that regulation will change soon. So I think a lot of things are already possible, but you just need to do it. And so, there are like certain markets, they're so highly regulated, like the balancing or demand response market is, for instance, in Germany. At this point, just doesn't make sense to start like a very scalable business on top of that. It can make sense maybe in 2 or 3 years, if it's more like a mass market, and also the technology is getting a little bit cheaper, and also that the regulation requirements are getting not that high anymore. But I think if we all push the right people and companies also to change, I think that can help. But I think the biggest accelerator that regulation is changing are, at the moment, I would say, the high energy prices. But also, I think every one of us, if we demand for certain products and solutions, we also can drive the change of regulation. Because if there's a market demand, it suddenly will work. And I think there are good examples. I think with Tesla, they have built up superchargers very early on along the streets, where most of the people said, I don't know if it's in line with the regulation or not, but they just did it. And of course, they found a way to made it in line with the regulation. So I think it's hard, but it's not impossible to start anything in regards to that.
Yeah. And Tim, do you have any experience with that, of kind of balancing regulation, or should it foster startups? Well, or
it always depends. I mean, there are some areas where regulation is your friend, and in other cases your enemy. I think it's just one of the things as a founder or a company, you need to make sure that you're networked with the relevant actors, both in politics, but also just have your ear close to the developments, and then at some point, start shaping the discussion by being outspoken, by, of course, also working with press, educating people, in some cases working with authorities. And I mean, in some areas, I see a lot of really positive regulation out of the European Union coming, regulating big tech, and also regulating big energy in some cases. And so there are some very good approaches, making sure to keep big tech companies in check. And it's just one thing you need to really manage, and you need to devote time to, and to also have a few people on board who really know how regulation works and how to be close to politicians and regulators, and be part of that discussion, and not just left out and leave the field to the big guys.
Yeah, touching on that, I think a tip I'd give people who start a company or who are doing it, hire experts sometimes. I know, often you want to do it yourself, you want to learn everything, but especially on the regulatory field, get some help. There's a lot of professionals out there. Partner up. It doesn't have to be very costly. Be vocal, be outspoken, but sometimes just hiring advice and getting a person to explain you the regulatory playing field within 2 hours is going to save you nearly 2 weeks of research. That's smart times money spent. And that's something I'd recommend, because regulation is changing. There is an opportunity to influence it. And actually, I started my career out in public affairs it feels like decades ago, but I did. And what's interesting is often also on the regulatory side, people are very interested in hearing the input from startups and, how innovation could help change it. So don't think that even if you're not too big, you're not a big corporation, you can't make an impact. But by having people help you reach the right people who want to listen, you can make that impact.
Wise words. Thank you, Annemarie. Very helpful. And we've already talked about kind of the next big things in energy, but Tim, can you give us a little bit of insight into where are the gaps in climate tech? Where do you see kind of future successes? What are the emerging markets?
So, one thing we're seeing is that a lot more money, for example, goes into transportation compared to transportation's role, really. So, we all know the micromobility, like the e-scooters. We've seen electric vehicles, and that's all good and all positive. But the share of transportation in the global CO2 footprint is actually much smaller than that. So we need to look beyond that. I think energy transition is one. There is more and more interest now, and with the higher energy prices, more and more pressure. The one which is really underlooked or overlooked, underfunded is food, agriculture, and land use. So anything organic, whether that's alternative proteins, whether that's forestry, whether that's the rebuilding of the soil, so agriculture and enrichment of the soil. So there are a lot of really interesting things happening on that front, where I really hope for even more innovation and scalable approaches to decarbonize.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned energy prices there. With those sorts of challenges that come up so spontaneously, how do you think we can best react to them? Should existing companies innovate? Should new companies pop up? Or is that just kind of a short-term problem that the bigger companies can deal with? How do you think we can deal with these sorts of really sudden changes that we need to respond to quickly?
Well, I think it's all of the above. The big ones, the small ones, everybody needs to adapt the regulators. I think what I really find important is that we abstract from the fact that it's kind of a short-term crisis, because otherwise we're in this constant crisis mode. But it's like there's a long-term problem with fossil fuels, obviously, ecologically, climate change, but there's also economically, it makes no sense. we're paying hundreds of billions as Germany, for example, and even more as Europe to ship fossil fuels across the globe, burn it. It's a totally inefficient system, pollute the climate, fund dictators around the world. It's like, and doesn't even make sense for our economy in the long run. So I think abstracting from those short-term things, we need to really think, okay, this is a long-term problem we need to solve over the next 10 years, and it's very doable with the advances of renewable energy, and that's what we always, I think, have to keep as the North Star.
And David, what's your perspective on balancing those short-term and long-term goals?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think first of all, I think it's important having this North Star, and then also try to kind of execute very short term on that. Of course, there will be certain very fast changes along the way, but I think you just need to get started. And I think just recently we have seen the COP27 happening in Egypt. And when I read the news, what kind of basically Germany did was more getting exploration rights for gas fields in Senegal and Egypt, I guess it was. So it's kind of what Tim said. And I think that's very short-sighted, because I think as we are in this big crisis and also change, and it's, of course, sometimes you need to solve it right now, and there needs to be done some compromises. Of course, there will be like this, how you say it, this Übergang. I'm just missing like the English word, but it won't go from today until tomorrow. So of course we can't switch off fossil fuels tomorrow, but I think we need to invest more in renewable solutions. Otherwise, it will be in 5 years of time the exact same situation again. And I think that's like the big balance we need to take. And yeah, I think we can start deciding what kind of heating systems we are buying or using, what kind of car, or if we have a car, what kind of transport we're taking. And I think that also can kind of set the direction, also then force again somehow the government to do certain stuff. So that's kind of my perspective, but I think that's not easy to kind of have the right balance.
Yeah. And I think that kind of comes into education as well. And Tim, you mentioned before, you want to have solutions that even climate change deniers would adopt. How difficult is that educational element of kind of telling people that we need these solutions, that renewable energy is good, that all of these things, they don't have to sacrifice things in their life to adopt these clean energy solutions or any kind of clean tech? Tim?
I mean, education starts at childhood. I mean, in my case, I think, I mean, part of why I'm interested in this is because I grew up in Freiburg, which is like a real eco city, and I was involved and active as a teenager in that during that time. And I don't know how I would react to these things today if I wouldn't have done that. So and that's hard to replicate for if you haven't grown up like this. As with everything else, I think it's a lot. It's a lot of education, also of the media. I mean, that's why I hate things like what the Springer Presse does on constantly shooting against anything which is climate friendly, just kind of for the sake of being against that for whatever reasons. And so it's a hard topic. I mean, also with social media, with recent Twitter takeover, all those things, it's something I'm definitely concerned about, because if you're not able to educate people, then it's just a super uphill battle. And I don't know. It's like, Annemarie, what do you think? It's like it's one of the hardest questions.
It is one of the hardest questions, and now having children myself, I think it's you even see it even clearer. You know, maybe I think start with yourself. You know, start walking the talk. So that means that, you know, start leading by example. Start talking about it. Start addressing it. And I know it sounds very basic and maybe small, and of course, you know, we want to make major impact, but I think it starts also with you and how we act and what we demand, and David, you know, also what we demand for products, you know, what we ask. So start with those kind of things to educate, but also I think and that's something we should be careful about, is not only think in our, you know, eco European bubble, maybe even, because there are a lot of other people who have very different hardships, and climate change is really not one of them, because they're thinking about how to feed their children and, you know, going to get their children to school. And I do think it's very important to be mindful of that, because I think we need to bring everyone along.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Annemarie. And we only have a few more minutes, so I'd like to just kind of ask you each, if you could wish for one thing that would change or the new that would come in the clean tech space, what would it be? Hard question. Tim, starting with you.
So if I have one thing, I think it really be the wish for regulation to set a proper CO2 price across everything, like no exceptions, no loopholes, everybody, like 200 euros or something per ton. Of course, making sure that poor households, I agree with you, what you just said, Annemarie, on that one, that poor households basically get reimbursed for that, or the respective social security is increased so that they don't suffer. But on the other side, there's no reason if I want to heat my house and I decide to live in a certain amount size house, then there's no reason that I shouldn't pay for that. But so there's a clear pricing across everything, including also removing all the respective subsidies, because that then, and bringing this back to the startup question, that would really that would let thousands of startups bloom, which then suddenly have solutions which actually make real economic sense, because polluting the environment and the climate suddenly isn't free anymore. So then the rest would be done by entrepreneurs, and so that's really the one thing I think which would need to happen.
Annemarie, what about you?
It's a very hard question. One thing that you could wish in the tech space a wish that I have is that, you know, and maybe it sounds very broad and sensitive, but I really wish that we think of how can we now get innovation down as fast as possible to the masses. You know, how can we bring the climate tech innovations, the energy innovations that are there to everyone? And that's also bearing in mind, I think, the crises which we face now. So that I'd have a wish, you know, I'd wish for some technology to come down raining fast, you know, if and being supported maybe by governments or by big visionaries. But Greta, it's a very good question, and maybe I should write a blog about it and get back to you on this one.
Well, I look forward to reading your blog then, after you've had a little bit more time to think about it. David, what about you?
Well, I think Tim did a pretty good one with the CO2 price. I think at the end, it's all about making sustainable, carbon neutral product as cheap and as reliable that everyone can kind of afford it. And I think it's not that only like at the end climate deniers are buying these kind of products and solutions. I think it should be just the best. It's the cheapest and the best. And I think we can really work on that. It's like a wish I have in a long run that there is no other solution because it's the best and the cheapest. So everyone is kind of buying it and using it. And also, I think on a short term, what I would wish for is it's not kind of directly connected to a clean tech. It's more about that. I would say the carbon heavy lifestyle is not that cool anymore. Because if I browse through Instagram, I just see like person XYZ is flying to Australia and then to that and using a private jet and I don't know what. So that's for a lot of kids like the cool stuff. And I think that's unfortunately not the best way how we can save our planet. So I think maybe that other social media platforms are rising up where more like a green lifestyle is cool and not like this carbon heavy one.
Maybe that's the next big thing. But yeah, totally agree. Really interesting perspectives. Thank you all so much for the really insightful discussion. I think we covered a lot of ground there. You know, a lot of mindset change needed, education, regulation, innovation. So yeah, a lot going on. Thank you, Tim and Annemarie. Hope you have a great afternoon. Thanks, David.
Yep.
And we'll be back in 2 minutes talking about e-mobility.